Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
We are lighting the candle, a world that works. I'm Bill Correll, and I am here with one of my best friends in the entire world, and I've taken to calling her my twin here in the last couple of months. We just have the best time getting together and shooting holes in the sky for an hour. We are coming to you. This is our 191st episode of this podcast that was started way back in 2020. And so here we are. I just want to acknowledge at the beginning, we had as many as 6 or 7 different people who would cycle in and out of the different episodes. But I want to say Jan has been probably one of my steadfast and most enjoyable people to spend time with and share conversation. And I just want to acknowledge you on this kickoff episode in 2025. As you know, your partnership is always present. I feel you in my life wherever I go, and you're constantly sending me little gems that cause my day to seem to go better. And I want to acknowledge you for that. You're really great in that area, and many others.
Oh, thank you so much, Bill. Yeah, it's interesting because I messaged, a friend of mine this morning, Mary Jane, who was on a few weeks ago, and I said to her, "I just want you to know that your little tidbits of what you send me, like she sends me a lot of stuff on Messenger in the morning, beginning of the day. I said they give me hope. They just she'll send me something, and I'll be like she sent me this beautiful poem this morning that was just about finding joy, and I thought." Thank you so much. Because sometimes I don't care who you are, you just need to hear it, you know?
It's wonderful to put those things out into the world. And just by saying the word joy, both the listener and the hearer, or the sender and the receiver, immediately release endorphins and start to have a better feeling inside for no reason other than the fact that they're, presencing joy. It's a good word to be around, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean it was. And the poem was just, great. And I was just like, oh, I love this, because I am a big poetry person. So so I think that it's anything we can do to help uplift others is worthwhile.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that to me, because I say for me, the best poems are the ones that I get lost in while I'm reading. And when I'm done, I can't remember what I just read. I'm only left with a feeling. I'm left with a flavor of something that's present now that wasn't before I read the darn thing.
I love that description. That because it is the feeling that they evoke much more a lot. For me, sometimes the words are really spectacular, or the choice of words,
Yeah.
but a poem has the ability, or a really great writer has the ability to take you beyond the actual words. So you might not remember the text exactly, and I think that art is like that. I think you can like a photograph can be like that. If it really touches you in some way deep, then you might not remember the details, And that's why I think it brings to mind that, old quote that people will not remember what you said, but they'll remember what the way you made them feel.
Yes. Yes, I was here being present to that while you were speaking. That's one of my favorite quotes. So they won't remember who you were. They won't remember what you did. They won't remember what you said. They will only remember how you made them feel. There's some responsibility that goes along with that. I get accused from time to time of being too positive. I'll take it. It doesn't bother me in the least. I would much rather be accused of bringing more people a little bit of peace and hope and joy in a moment, and they don't remember it was me that did it, and that's not why I do it. I don't do it so that I can get credit for doing it. As a matter of fact, the people who are the ones who are the most negative about other people who are positive, they could take a minute or two and take a look at where they're coming from in the world and whether or not they're living their best life in their best world, right?
And I have gotten accused throughout my life of being too sensitive. And I used to look at that as being some sort of like, there must be something wrong with me, or why am I so sensitive? Like, and then I realized it also made me like what I want to say, that kindness gene kind of
Yes.
all of a sudden became very amplified for me because I totally felt what people were going through. So, and then I started looking at it as not a negative, like, but it took me a long time to get there. And I talked to a friend of mine who also said that she was always told that.
Yeah.
Like, she had been bullied at work and her boss had told her, like, oh, you're too sensitive, kind of thing. And then you think to yourself, like, well, I'd rather be too sensitive than not feeling, you know?
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of different distinctions in the world right at the moment. And I think in many cases, the people that are exploring the edges, I keep seeing a it's a meme of a story that just keeps showing up in my feed over and over again about this woman who is a certified sociopath, and the rest of the title is and what she'd like you to know about that. You know, and I do think that when we think in terms of people who are empathetic, or just call them empaths, if you will, there's also another thing that's called being a mirror empath, and that is, as you just said, actually experiencing what you see people in front of you experiencing. Sensation for sensation. And on that side of the coin, that's where it's ultra sensitive to what's going on the other side of your skin. And a sociopath is typically not interested at all on anything going on the other side of their skin. And there's no good and no bad as far as they're concerned. As far as they're concerned, there is no morality and immorality. There's no just and unjust. There's just, this is what I'm doing. And so if you think about it, there are jobs in the world that the empath can really knock it out of the park, but they would be the wrong person to be in charge of, let's say, a regiment of troops in Afghanistan trying to take a mountain, right? That'd be the wrong place to be coming from.
It's interesting that you say that because I was watching a movie the other day and it was a movie about, I think well, it is based on a true story of a young boy who had leukemia, and the doctors that treated him, he was at St. Jude's, and in it they have this wonderful doctor in the beginning who gets on, like, who takes like gives the parents his cell phone number, and, like, was reach out to me anytime you have any questions. And because he doesn't like the treatment doesn't succeed, he's passed on to another doctor who's doing some experimental work and who basically goes in and just is very cold, kind of standoffish, kind of like, is almost like, to the parents, like when they ask for his cell phone number, he's like, no, 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 just speak to the nurse, like, and she'll get in touch with me, kind of thing. but sadly enough, the boy passes away, um, at the age of 2 or 3. I mean, it's very, very sad, and that doctor, the second doctor, like, you can see him as he's telling the parents, and he starts to cry,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like you realize that he has put on this kind of, like, almost like mask or kind of shield of protection
Yeah.
because of, like, just for this feeling, and it was just as I watched it, I thought to myself, like, we're so quick to judge people so often, and it was just so striking to me that, like, it takes when I was in the medical world for, around and I don't know that, let's say, health professionals get any training as to how to deal, and not in a negative way, but how to, like, deal with their emotions, how to deal with, people who are, like, let's say in his circumstance, like these parents who were so distraught, and I thought, like, my heart kind of went out to him. Like, I really felt for him. It
Yes.
was just like, and I think that, there are positions where we look at it as being very impersonal and insensitive and everything. But to have a job like that, you kind of understand why, let's say, he was the way he was.
Yeah. And we generalize from an instant that the person's like that all the time, you know? And really what we're seeing, there's all of everything, 360 degrees around my head. And we get one little quarter-inch snippet to have an interaction with somebody, and we think we know what they're all about, you know? It's kind of an interesting thing if you were to look at life and the world and all the people who behave well and behave badly in front of you. If you could just take a moment to realize that everything they're doing is an effect of something that happened before. It's an effect of an effect of an effect of an effect. And this goes back generations in some cases. They get raised and born into a world where they have limited choices in terms of how they can respond to their environment and how they can respond to other people. And so they're really doing what's would be an appropriate response given all of the things that could be chosen from, which in this little instance look to you like this is generally how they are. So we label them as trustworthy and untrustworthy, lovable and unlovable, mean and rotten versus, beautiful and open.
Right. And the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
But I think we also, like as you're describing that, and I described this story, you think about, let's say, the training of, let's say, health professionals in the United States, where I don't know how much, maybe it's gotten a little bit better, but I don't know how much, like, compassion training they get, how much, how much training they get, and even how to address,
Yeah.
like, what they're going through, um, and everything. And you kind of, I think you get a better understanding and grasp
Yeah.
as to how, let's say, how we got where we are. That, as far as, let's say, in the healthcare world, like, how we got here. It's
Right.
like you get a better picture of, like, oh, okay, well, that kind of makes sense considering that, when they got trained, there was no emphasis on anything emotional, like emotional resilience and coping mechanisms, and you know and encouraging of, like, sharing of, what they might be going through. Like, that's not really addressed, I don't think, at all.
Sure. No, I think you're spot on, and I have a feeling that almost all of the professional trades, same with law, same with mathematics, actuaries, they get a whole lot of these things, and different types of problems to resolve and everything. But when they get into the real world of working in an insurance company or a bank or something like that, where they're doing, prediction and risk assessments on different types of portfolios over time, they have nothing to do with the book learning. This is all about, like, how can you get on the back of a horse and actually ride it. I don't care how many swimming lessons you take that are outside of the pool, they are of no use to you whatsoever the first time you go under and you can't breathe. So, I mean, life is like that, where we just toss people into the deep end of the pool. And the better their grades were in a learning environment, the more we think they can handle now in terms of responsibility that we would really require experience, right? It's the lived experience in all of us that lets us validate the learning and separate it from, well, should be this way, shouldn't it? And learning after a little while, well, that didn't work. And I got to stop hitting myself in the head here because that's what the book said to do, because it ain't working. It's not making me feel any better. And we're getting no results. So let's throw that out and let's ask questions.
Right. And for me, I remember the first time I was kind of left on my own to handle some work in the lab, and my coworker was pregnant and went into labor early. So
Yeah.
all of a sudden, I'm sitting there at work, finishing up at like 11 p.m. and my mother's like, just go home. And I'm like, I just can't go home. Like, I mean, that's not the way this works. I go home and, I have to call the patient back the next day and say, sorry, I need another blood sample, whatever it was. And so I think that there is no, yes, technically, did I know what to do? But I didn't know how to troubleshoot and I didn't know how to like necessarily problem solve. That came from, years of experience, which, especially in the beginning, you don't have. And so I'm not saying that, I mean, that, you don't honor people for beginning. Everybody needs to start somewhere.
Right.
But I think that you have to remember that so much of so many positions, jobs. I mean, just think about, and I'm not a parent, but the same thing. It's not like you're, from what I'm a pet mom. It's not like they come with a set of instructions that you follow, like a manual of like, okay, this is what I need to do. Check box one, you know.
Well, and I got to tell you, even when we're in places in life where there are manuals, they're not terribly useful until you're able to be in a position where you can, put the boat in the water and see if it sinks or it floats, right? Which is why I think I own maybe 63 or 64 different self-help programs put on by, Brian Tracy and, just hundreds of other people, including Deepak and Tony Robbins, et cetera, et cetera. If any of the ones before that had ever been sufficient, you think I'd have bought the next one?
I,
So,
but I think that some of it is, the fact that, I know that I've done enough programs like in person programs or online stuff. And
yeah,
so much of it is implementation. So it's the fact that it's really nice because they all sound good.
right.
They all sound really great. And you're like, oh, okay, I really think this is it. This is the solution for me. But it's all about the actual follow through and the actual incorporation in your own life. I mean, you can learn all you want about breathing, let's say breathing practices, but they're not going to do anything if like you park them on a shelf. You got to put them into like daily practice and sit there and get into a situation, let's say, which you find stressful, and say, okay, just breathe, go to your breath and then feel the impact it has. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, I feel better. But it's like on the job training.
Always. Like I said, want to learn how to swim? Jump in water.
That's right.
One of two results are going to happen. You're either going to, get out of the water or you're not, and that's a pretty stark example. But I think to your point, um, we are given so many tools that are gifts from other people where they try to express in language what worked for them and little tips and formulas and all this neat stuff. And but as you just mentioned, in a list of 7 things that you can do when you're stressed, you know a box breathing or something of that nature is in the list somewhere. And if you haven't really practiced it and made it to a point where you remember it, it's of no use to you at all that it was in that list.
No, and I think that, you know, and we've spoken about this in the past of just like not attaching necessarily to one type, to
Right.
realize like to start to, to play a little bit and sit there and say, well, today, let me try this because Either you try one thing and it's not working for you that day, or it just like you sit there and you go, like, I don't feel like doing that today. And what else can I try? Is like my big, like, okay, well, that didn't work. What else could I try right now? Like, what else could I do? And for me lately, and I know it's kind of, people out there might think it's hokey, but I have these lift your vibration cards, which
Yeah.
come with a little book. And that's like my go-to right now of like I sit and I, maybe do a few moments of meditation and get really quiet and breathe. And then I shuffle the deck and I'm like, okay, offer me some insight today. And it's amazing how much those messages kind of mean to me
Right.
and what they kind of keep me going some days of like, okay, and of hope and resilience. And it might sound kind of silly, but I feel like that's why I think poetry, like these little, messages that like Mary Jane sends me in the morning of like these little cute pictures or some sort of Snoopy or Pooh thing, because I love Winnie the Pooh,
Me
you know,
too.
you know, and it just makes me smile. And I'm just like, okay, you know,
Yeah, one of my most recent favorite Pooh ones is where he and Piglet are walking through the woods, and Pooh says, "What day is it, Piglet?" And Piglet says, "It's today." And he said, "Oh, my favorite day."
that's one of my all-time favorites.
Same here. And if you think about it, 9 out of 10 times when we're feeling a state of mind that is not pleasant to us, that we really don't want to be in the middle of, and we can't stand that it's there, more often than not, all we're doing is avoiding putting a name to it for a moment that gets you a little bit of peace. So there's this thing that happens that's kind of remarkable, really, that if you name something, it starts to disappear, if not completely, at least to some degree. And for people who are upset in a situation and feeling overwhelmed, if they could just stop for a moment, as you said, take one deep breath and say, "I'm feeling stressed right now." It's called telling the truth. As opposed to "I shouldn't be feeling stressed" is the way you were feeling the moment before you actually admit it.
I I love that because I think so much of our lives we spend kind of denying it. It's
Yes.
like, I shouldn't feel like this right now, you know? And I think society doesn't do a great job sometimes at sitting there, and sometimes we have these extreme examples of going through something and something else in the world has happened or whatever. And you kind of feel guilty that your own life has like taken over to some extent in that circumstance,
Right.
but I was reading something recently and they were saying, but that doesn't like sort of downgrade what you went through. Yes, whatever that was horrible.
Yep.
But what you're experiencing at that moment, and I can use a practical example for everybody. I remember I was in divorce court on 9/11. Okay.
My
So
goodness.
sitting and waiting to go in toward the judge when I heard the planes hit.
And you were in Manhattan.
Well, I wasn't. I was in New Jersey
Oh,
because
okay.
that's where I
Close
lived,
enough.
but
Yeah.
close enough. Yeah, very close enough. Like we walked outside and we could see smoke, kind of thing. And so I remember getting home and it was a very traumatic day for me. And I remember thinking and feeling so guilty that I was like kind of wrapped up in what had happened to me in divorce court and whatever. And I'd gone through that and all that kind of stuff. And I remember going through a lot of guilt because I figured all these people died. And that was horrible, like, don't get me wrong, but
Right.
it didn't and what happened to me was still was still horrific for me.
Yeah.
And I think we tend to do that, like, quite often. There's a lot of things that happen in the world, and I'm not saying, yes, it does put a little bit in perspective what you go through, but what I went through was still bad for me. And so, it's kinda like, acknowledge that.
Well, it's what I'm hearing you say is kind of on the order of hearing a news report that there's been a violent earthquake, outside of Mexico City, and so far there's more than 2,400 people missing, and it's not looking good, because it could be up to 20 or 30,000 people. We've had just that kind of catastrophe happen over and over and over again. Tsunamis in Japan, earthquakes, in Afghanistan, and in I want to say probably Iran. There's all of these things that they come in and they're just too big to get our mind around. And what is really happening to us is what we can see, feel, taste, touch, and hear.
Mhm.
And so there's nothing wrong with having your life be bigger than major world events for a moment, until it starts to settle out again, and until you start to feel like what you just experienced as being near death, sitting in divorce court, which is the last thing in the world you probably wanted to be doing, ever. And now on top of that, we've got this catastrophic thing where two planes flew into the World Trade Center, and then one crash landed out in Pennsylvania, and then another one into the Pentagon. And before the end of the day, I know all of us felt like we were at war with somebody,
Absolutely. And
waiting for
I
the nukes to go off.
right, exactly. And just I remember, and as long as we're talking about, I remember first of all after that, and I know you've said you didn't go into like you've never been down there. I mean, I have to say that the city never felt the same afterwards for me,
Yeah,
ever, and still doesn't. I go through, and not like I was afraid to go in, like that, not about that. There was just a different energy there for me after that point. And not that we want anything, but when we talk about the beginning, when we talk about feeling, there was something to the effect of uniting people. Like I remember
yeah,
standing on street corners and hugging strangers, and it was just this unbelievable feeling of, commuting in Port Authority. And just like, I remember there was this statue in the, like on the main floor of Port Authority bus terminal for a long time. And people would gather around this statue and just cry. And people would hug each other. And there was
yeah,
something in a way so beautiful about that connection and that we shared. Like there was a kindness in the city that happened after that,
yeah.
that then began to fade, which saddens me, but that's what happens, over time. People forget or people get lost in their own world or whatever. And so, but there was this element of connection and kindness that happened.
Yeah, you're reminding me of all of these memorials that were, have you seen this person, where people posted pictures of their loved ones and their names. And even if you didn't have anybody that was remotely near the Twin Towers, being up on 38th Street or something like that, 38th and Madison Avenue, and there's a bunch of these pictures posted. There were folks that did that all over the island. you know
Mhm,
if you've seen this person, call this number, and on a board maybe 3 feet by 5 feet, there'd be over 150 pictures with phone numbers and stuff. And it just, I sat there at one time looking at it, and I thought to myself, yeah, I knew some people that were there. I knew some people that were could have been there but weren't, and I knew a lot of people who knew people who were there, and especially on the firefighting side. I have
mhm.
a lot of friends that are not so much on the New York City police, but firefighters, I think, are a little bit more um, tight communicators with out of state, different parts. Police chiefs, they're more territorial, you know what I mean, and geographic in nature. Where firefighters are always looking for other people, to draw from, to get good ideas from, to get good personnel from. And to lose that many firefighters all in one day, it broke people's hearts. I mean, firefighters, volunteer and professional, across the United States, I've never seen so many grown men just sit and weep.
And I think that as you speak about that, I think there is something about firefighters and just the whole idea of the ability to cross border, cross state, depending
Yes.
on what's happening even now. Like I have a student, I have a previous student that used to come to a lot of my in-person classes whose son is a forest firefighter
Yeah.
out in the Northwest. And, in those situations where you get people like, you'll get firefighters who come in from Colorado and who come in from Oregon and who come in from, Washington. And, when they all kind of like something happens and there's a lot of just camaraderie and I'm like, okay, we're going to mobilize.
Yes. Yeah, it's an interesting thing that, and we're kind of drifting off of the subject a little bit, but of course we're wherever we drift is perfectly fine because some weeks it's a parachute we come in on, and other weeks it's a balloon that we kind of bounce around on. But the point is that in the area of firefighting, um, and police as well, and even to maybe a lesser degree, but the same, in uh, emergency services, where ambulance drivers, first responders, of all types, they seem to be a preponderance of people who have served in the military, and they're looking for a continuation of that military discipline in terms of rank, in terms of being very strict in terms of what you can do and what you can't do. So much that it's in the culture, and people don't have to be asking each other or correcting each other. But but the point is that when you have a paramilitary organization like that, we've gone through, I think, in the last 25 years, the greatest transformation in terms of dealing with feelings and breakdowns and loss and grief, that where it's actually now something that especially in the firefighting area, which I'm pretty well aware of with folks that I know and speak with, they're getting out ahead of it. They're linking arms with narcotics and alcohol anonymous, that sort of thing. They've got a network of public speakers that go all over the United States. We're now talking about processing your grief, processing your PTSD, not pushing it down and not using some sort of a substance to bring it under control, if you will, so that you can be a functioning whatever it is, where people are now starting to decide, I'm going to have a different life going forward than the one that I've been living up to now, where I couldn't be real and authentic about how I was feeling about things that didn't work out. When you come on a scene and you find somebody who's burnt to a crisp inside of a car, and there's not a darn thing you can do about it, and there's no real healthy way to get rid of it, what do you do?
Hmm. But I feel like, we have to be that, we have to do that for other people. So
Yeah.
whether we're in the, no matter what we do, we have our own circle of people that we talk to, that we interact with, let's say on a daily, on a weekly, basis.
Right.
And can we show up as ourselves for when we're interacting with those people
Right.
so that we feel less lonely and less disconnected, and let's say and feel more connected, let me phrase it like that, and the more positive, and feel like more connected, because I think that it's very easy for us to feel disconnected. I'm collaborating on another book with 6 other people, and that was one thing that's been really beautiful, is that we all, like, have now sort of written our chapters, um, and we is the authenticity and the commonality it is. Like, we're all from different parts of the world. We're all from different, we're different ages, different genders, and coming with our life experiences, and just there is this feeling of real connection based on the stories we're sharing. And that's what, to me, when you show up as you are, that's what you're doing. You're showing up with your story at the moment,
Yeah.
and we all need to be able to feel like there's somebody who cares about that story.
There's in what you're saying, I think you're actually expressing what I'm talking about in terms of, especially in paramilitary organizations, it's not
Mhm.
been okay. And not only has it not been okay, it's been suck it up, buttercup. Everybody goes through what you're going through. And there's also a recognition now that it's unacceptable to lose through suicide and cirrhosis of the liver and other heart attacks and those kinds of things. People that are in this job for 15 to 25 years, compared to other walks of life. And I think that's a healthy thing to talk about. I think it's a good thing, and it's authentic to realize that these, at the end of the day, yes, they're highly trained, and yes, they've taken on a job where they know they're going to be face to face with trauma and life and death situations many more times than the average breed of cat. But at the same time, how can you ever know what you've gotten yourself into again before you've experienced it?
Mm.
And the other thing that's kind of a comparison, we talk about people who have PTSD, and we can accept that in an instant, that they were in Afghanistan, or they were working, undercover someplace in Europe, in Slovenia, or wherever it was in the world, and they went through hell for 2 years. We can get that, and they come back out, and a lot of them don't find themselves for the rest of their lives. They go on the street. However, if you look at the trauma that shows up for an average firefighter over a 5 or a 10 or a 15-year period, we're talking 20 to 30 times more experience than one of the other people had experienced in 1 year. you know and they're doing it on and on and on, and they don't get the piece of cheese and retire until they got 20 years in, right? So how do we take care of those folks? And this is where I think the thought leaders and people like yourself that are out there, on the skinny branches of sharing stories with each other for no better reason than to get to know each other, just to authentically and genuinely, interact with another human being, and not, trying to show up and buff yourself up and act like you're more than you are, because people can see right through that. But at the same time, you're not helping anybody and you're not helping yourself.
Absolutely. But I think that in life, we have this image or this feeling that we need to show up and pretend we're okay when we're not okay.
Yes.
Whether, coming from, you know, my dominant work, let's say work life when I worked in the city, which was in the 80s and the 90s, which was very much like I was an independent woman and you didn't want to show up as a woman because you got called, oh, like if you were sensitive, people would say, oh, you're just being a woman, so you had this attitude of like, I'm going to put on the armor and pretend I'm a man kind of thing. And,
Good luck
kind
on
of
that.
thing. Good luck with that. And then on the other hand, all the men who would not because they would be called a sissy or they would be called, they weren't like, they were being too emotional. And that was the last thing you wanted to be told, it was, and so everybody walked around with this like that whole attitude of no pain, no gain, and kind of attitude. Like that was the gym slogan, right? It was like no pain, no gain. That you had to like just put on this you gotta pretend and go to work and make sure life wasn't happening outside the office or wherever you worked and get as much done and as you could, and the work ethic was crazy. And I have enough friends now, especially through COVID, that don't live in the US who think we're crazy here as
Yeah.
far as our work ethic. The fact that like no one takes vacation like in Europe and like other countries, like the last 2 weeks of December, they shut down. Like Christmas and New Year's, no one works. Like, I mean, it's like a holiday.
Yep.
I mean, I was just on a call this morning. Everybody's like, "No, we didn't turn on our computers for 2 whole weeks," kind of attitude. I'm like, "That would never happen here."
Right.
And we don't honor people, like, no matter what profession they are. And
Well, I
I'm not
was
saying I
always
don't
under
wanna I don't
Yeah,
wanna belittle, like, the whole like, what you were saying, like, the firefighters and everything, because I do understand that, but I think in normal society, it happens also.
yeah. And the fact of the matter is that it doesn't have to be death for stress and trauma to be present. It can be just, deadline after deadline after deadline, in the workplace. It can be working for months and months and years on something that consistently fails, to achieve an objective over and over and over again, that you don't get relief from and you don't have a healthy outlet for. And you can't tell things, you can't tell the truth about how things are going, and that it really sucked that you just really failed again. It's like, no, let's get back at it. And the thing that I've really appreciated over the last 4 or 5 years is the introduction of thinking about this recovery period, of when you do a challenging job. You make your choice, you buy all of your equipment, you get your raw materials, and then you do the thing, and then it doesn't work, and then you need to take a time out. You need to look at it. You need to ask questions like, what just happened? What were we expecting to happen? And what actually did happen? And take a time out to just sort of catch your breath again and go into the next round of trying to accomplish with a better set of questions and a better objective. And at least secure in the knowledge that it's okay that you don't accomplish the thing you're setting out to accomplish. In business, it's just not that way. You're at, you know, DEFCON 5 all the time, except for when you're getting drunk. That's pretty much it. And I got to tell you, having been around people down in Manhattan, especially Madison Avenue and Wall Street, and these are crazy people who are planning to be totally worthless by the time they're 35 years old, but they want to make a ton of money, and have a big house and have $200,000 cars and all the rest of those things, and it's worth it to them, they think, to spend their bodies when they're less than 30 years old.
I love how you said it, and it's worth it, they think,
Yes.
because I think that when you're as we've spoken about, is like what we've decided our measure of success is,
Right.
as we age or as we mature. I shouldn't say age. Um, uh, as we mature and life happens, and then you realize, what's truly important, what's really of value. And I look at who I was, and not that it was, I'm not saying, but I just look at who I was
Yes.
then and who I am now and realize, in a way, how shallow my idea of success was.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was all fed to. I mean, I'm a little older than you are, so this may be something that you remember or not. First of all, don't trust anybody over 30. That was the hippie generation from the 60s and early 70s. And then the other one was when the hippies finally decided to go to work and started making money, they said, live fast, die young, leave a beautiful corpse. And so these were not terribly empowering things, to a culture or to a group of productive human beings. And you stop and think about what each generation has done in response to the generation before. We all seem to, kind of swing one way out to this direction and then back towards the center and then back out towards the other direction. And I think after what we've been through over the last 15 or 20 years, I think we're headed back into a very conservative period of time. And what I mean by that is where people are more focused on what's going on in their own lives and households, and are they making a living, and are they actually building anything for the future. I think you're going to start seeing more people getting married in the next 20 years than we saw get married in the last 20 years. you know we're starting to head into a different kind of an environment where people are now starting to say, look, yeah, there's things that are going on in the world that are not great, but you know what? I want to survive this. I not only want to survive, I want to thrive. I want to leave my mark on the world. Those would be the things that what I would say when I was 20 or 25 years old. There was something for me to achieve and to conquer within myself. But I would never have been able to say it to you that way. There were
Mhm.
things I didn't like and there were things that I loved. And I didn't know what to do about the things I didn't like.
To me, and I don't, I mean, my exposure to little children is somewhat limited. Like, and I have kind of a skewed view of those little children just because of my familial setting. So it's kind of like a specialized group, let's say, of individuals. So I don't know if this is global, but I would love to see, and maybe this will is like the value of family and family time, and the importance of that interaction, of you know having parents that are present. And I'm not only talking physically present, but are present, you know, in our sense of, like, having conversations with their kids, you know,
Yeah.
being concerned about, kids and, what they're exposed to. Um,
It's an interesting perspective when you stop and think about when you and I were young. I mean, like 5 or 10 years old, 95% of all of the people that we knew had two parents. The ones who didn't had lost somebody due to health or some kind of an accident or circumstance or were killed in a war, that sort of thing. And now it's like 50% of the kids out there have two parents, and the other 50%, whatever socioeconomic class they're in, makes no difference. Could be divorced, could be that they never got married in the first place, where this is a really cool thing that's been happening for the last 15 years, where people go, so many people are getting divorced, why bother getting married in the first place? So but then it turns out they're together for 15, 18, 20 years. It's like the piece of paper has nothing, means nothing next to the promise, if you
mhm,
will.
mhm. And I think the other thing that you didn't like, when I was a kid, and I'm saying one parent who stays home now, but at that time, it was not common for mothers to work. It
Right.
just happened to be like most of the families were, male, female. So mother, father kind of thing. So that was not common. I remember my mother went to work when I was like in fourth or fifth grade. Um, and she was a kindergarten teacher. But before then, she was home.
Yes.
And there was the whole idea that, so you didn't have that that whole scenario of, working parents, or if you had two parents, both parents were not working, one was usually much more might have been much more present than the other. uh, and I've spoken about before that, now, I mean, I have two neighbors that are, a few neighbors that are stay-at-home dads. And I'm not, but I do think there's a lot to be said for, if possible, having that. And I'm not saying don't, if you have a career, and if that, I don't like to label people as bad or good or whatever, but I'm just saying there's something real valuable of kids having a steady adult who kind of is in their life.
Well, I don't think it's not only valuable, I think it's necessary.
Oh yeah, no,
There,
absolutely.
there's 100 studies that basically show, it- you know, the way for anyone to get to being a prosperous 30-year old is to have, the same set of grounding, um, nurturing, culturally, social, growing nuclear family experiences, growing up. And when you look at a society where that seems to be coming less and less and less, but you think about it this way, Jan, in the 1960s, I think 70% of women were household chiefs. They were the moms, right? And for whatever reason, and you stop and think about the politics behind feminism and what it was supposed to mean and what it turned into and what it really turned into over the last 50 years, they're completely different things. Okay. And quite frankly, I have no problem with people making a choice, but you can't make women bad and wrong for choosing to stay home and raise their kids. You just
No,
can't do it. And that's what we've done for 50 years. You know, it's
I remember
equal
how.
this for equal that, and it's never been about equal this for equal that. It's been about let's upset the apple cart and get things to go a different way, and that's culture killing, in my opinion.
I remember having a very ill opinion of women who stayed home. And the
Right?
last thing I wanted to do was stay home and, and be a quote unquote like housewife. That was, that to me, there was such a, like, I was very scholastically oriented. I lived in Manhattan. Women were ad execs where they were like, lawyers, they were doctors. They weren't, housewives and moms.
Right. But see that you're putting your finger right on something. It was bred out of you to have the choice. It's a dichotomy. This is
Right.
good, that's bad. And so
Exactly.
that's how we were always raised, with an either or and not with a whole like banquet sitting in front of us, a buffet that we can go choose from any way that we want to.
Or just not even the option to even consider doing in some way or form,
Right.
trying to change the culture so that, let's say working part time was acceptable and having workplaces address the fact that, people had families and, you know, and or one parent had the parents had families, and so therefore somebody needed to be home for the kids. I mean, technology wasn't there either, so now in a way it's a little, in my opinion, it's a little bit better in the fact that people could call in or work online if they needed, but that we didn't force that either. We kind of where it was acceptable to kind of sit there and say, okay, well, I'm working now, so home life doesn't exist. And so I've just got to learn how to navigate that in the however many hours I have at night when I get home before I have to go to work the next day.
Yep. So think about it, okay? In the 1950s, we could have one income families that were nuclear, and the head of household made plenty of money to pay all of the bills. No credit.
Hmm.
People
Yep.
had no credit. In the
Hmm.
1960s, they started being issued credit cards, the Diners Club, American Express, Sears charge plate, all these sort of things. And when wives started going to work, even though they weren't making, because they were starting off at whatever age they were now, coming into the without any respect that their age had anything to do with their value. It was no, you're coming into the workforce at the same level your husband did 10 or 15 years ago. And remember, he didn't make very much money at the beginning either. So the next thing you know, we now can be borrowing, and we can get a house, and we can borrow, and we can get a car, and we can borrow, and we can get our kids to college, and we can borrow. Oh my God, suddenly both of us are working 80 hours a week and nobody's taking care of the kids. We have to do that to make ends meet.
Exactly. I mean, I remember, one of my big issues, I remember it was through a number of elections, where, people were at like, somebody should be at home, but yet it had gotten to the point where people couldn't afford anymore, where there wasn't two incomes coming in.
Right.
And so all of a sudden people were forced and still are forced to be able to make ends meet. Both people in the house, everybody in the household who can work has to work.
Well, it's gotten even worse than that,
Yeah, I
Jan,
know.
over the last since Barack Obama privatized, school loans back in 2009, so that everybody could have a college education. You now have couples coming out of school, each owing $200,000 in debt to the government. You think about that. What choices are going to be there for a 23-year-old going into the job market? And if those jobs are not there, for them to be able to even, barely make a living, and they've got all these kids that are living in their parents' basements, not because they're lazy, not because they, don't have ambition. It's because they can't make the numbers work.
Mhm. No, I was just talking to somebody that I know whose son is in the military, and she was talking to me about what he's going to he gets out. He's in the Marines. I think he's going to be out this year after
Yeah.
4 years of service. And so I said to her, she's like I said, "So what's he going to do when he gets out?" And she said, "Well, he actually is a diesel mechanic and has done 4 years of basically, extensive work." And so she said he should be able to get a pretty good job. And that to me was like such a breath of fresh air to hear,
Yes.
because what I hear from a lot of other friends I know whose kids, let's say are university or college educated, is they either can't get jobs in their fields, or they can and they don't pay enough. So they then have two or three jobs to just barely end up paying the bills.
Yeah.
And they all live at home. And that was the other thing we were talking about. If you want to talk about our age group, like I remember the last thing I wanted to do was move back home with my parents. I would have like I had four roommates like for like I don't know how many years living in Manhattan because I didn't want to, wasn't going to come back to Connecticut to live with my parents. And so it was almost like this. It became it was like not that it was the opposite of a badge of honor to go home. It was kind of like almost this inner disgrace of like, oh my gosh, like that was like to me the lowest. And I love
Yes.
my parents. I love my parents, but there was this real feeling of like, okay, I went to school. I'm supposed to be independent now.
Yes. If you go back to the nest after that, it doesn't last for very long.
And it didn't, and I don't know that my parents really would have minded. It was much more an internal kind of,
Yep.
let's say, feeling I had that that was not what I wanted. That was something that was I don't know, in my own head that was unacceptable, I should say. And so there was this real feeling of like, I'll share a room with two people, and we'll split it I don't know how many ways, but I'm not, but I have to live on, but I'm going to live on my own.
Well, the question that I have for you is, what do you think has changed? Are we messaging different to our children than we used to 40, 50 years ago?
Sadly enough, I don't think we are.
Yeah.
I think that sadly enough, I still think the outward measure of, let's say, success and status has not changed. That idea of like, like the house, the car, getting a university education or a college education, let's say advanced degree. Let's just kind of categorize it like that. I don't think that's changed. Um, and so I don't think a lot in that realm has changed. And that makes me really sad because I feel like, I don't know, I always felt like not everybody is meant to get like, not that like, I think everybody has a gift and everybody has, like, there's a reason every person is here and everybody has like something that they're supposed to bring to the world. But
Yeah.
I don't think that requires an advanced degree to be able to discover and to be able to thrive in that space. You know, I just don't. I don't think, if you're an artist, you're an artist. Yeah, you don't need if you're really, like, handy, like, both my brothers are extremely handy, and then, it's not your calling to sit in a classroom for, like, for years and years and years, kinda squashing out that innate ability to fix things and to, kind of thing. So I don't think the messaging has changed a whole lot, at least not from what I see.
I'm going to go out on a limb. We don't have a lot more time today, but I'm just going to make a wild ass statement for a moment. I think we have designed since World War II the educational system which was designed to produce exactly the result that we're getting.
Mhm.
And the way that we set up the relationship with the federal government and local teaching and making the municipalities and the towns dependent on federal dollars in order to have large modern buildings and everything that they need and be able to pay high teacher salaries and all the rest of that. They didn't used to be high as far as teacher salaries go, but when somebody is in a job for less than 3 years and they make 90 to $100,000 a year teaching third graders, I think there's parts of the state where you could actually say we need to think this over. We should not be paying people because we can. We should be really targeting our educational experience to maximize each student's development. And when if we were just to shift the focus from supporting the cogs in the wheel of the process and adding more and more money every single year, do you realize that over a period of time the educational budgets here in our town had to exceed the previous year's educational budget by 3%, or they would lose federal funding? Every single year it had to go up by 3%. Now, on what intelligent world does it ever make any sense, to require people to spend more money this year than last year? Do you get to the point where 60% of the education budget is coming from the federal government and the rest of it is coming from the municipality or the state government? In our state, we have income tax. A lot of states don't. And a lot of states don't pay the way that we do in the state of Connecticut. So, what I'm saying to you is, while we're doing those things, we're maximizing the relationship between the government that's paying the bill and organizing things so that they are, able to, at some level, say, because the Illinois tests or the CAP tests say XYZ, that we're doing the right thing here. Although we're now like what 63rd in terms of reading comprehension of 12th graders in the world. We're like there's so many countries that are doing a better job at turning out smart people than we are right now, and we're turning out enough smart people because we have a lot more people than most of the other countries in the world. There's probably 3 countries that have more population than we do, and they're turning out a lot more smart people than we are.
I mean, I think it's a very, very, very good point. The other thing that I think has happened, and this is, I think, an issue for our younger, like, for kids, is lack of time outside and exposure, let's say, to nature. And I don't care what and what, I think that there's a lot, and there's a lot to be, and then lack of exposure to the arts, which I think was a huge um detriment as and I'm not saying art, but I'm saying, like, all the creative kind of ventures and becoming so, I don't know, I want to say, in a way, scholastic, but they're, I'm not saying that's good scholastic, but so focused, I guess, or hyper focused on only one area of development for kids.
You're making my point, and I'll
Yes.
go further, and I'll indict the whole system because I don't believe that the goal of it is to develop the kids at all anymore. I believe the goal of it is to spend money, have a justification for spending more money, and for everybody in the process to get their beaks in and get them wet. If you stop and think about it, somebody who had a PhD, who was a guidance counselor, who was a neighbor of mine in the NFA school system, was making $12,000 a year in 1980. Let that sink in for a moment. That same position today is probably $160,000 to $180,000 a year. Where's the beef? Where's the justification for that? What's the point? The point is to attract more people to a vocation where they can get tenure, they can get into a situation, they can join a very strong union, and then for the rest of their lives, be able to count on a retirement benefit. And in the meantime, don't make too many waves about how we're not letting you teach your kids while you're going through this process, because Mother Country knows better than you do how to do this. Just shut up and go to do your work and don't make waves, and you'll get your 3 to 10% increases every couple of years, and life's going to be good for you. And some people are okay with that, and other people are not. They get in the middle of these situations, and I've got these unbelievable third graders, and they are knocking the world crazy. But I have to make them do things that are against, how they're wired at this age. I
I
have
mean,
to stifle their growth. I have to tell them that their enthusiasm is wrong.
as you're talking about, I'm thinking to myself because it's one thing that yoga always gets a lot of is a lot of teachers. So
Yes.
through the years, we've always gotten a lot of people who were teachers who would like come to class or whatever. And I've had a lot of students through the years, and almost every single one of the people that I knew who was a teacher ended up leaving teaching,
Yes.
probably before retirement age because the education system changed and because they couldn't what they called be creative.
Right.
Their kids. They weren't, one of my close friends was like a second or third grade teacher in actually the town I lived in when I lived in New Jersey. And she used to say, like, she said, I look back and I used to cook with my kids. And, we used to do all these really, she's like, we'd go outside, we'd go plant stuff in the yard, like all these things. And she said it got to the point where she couldn't do any of it anymore.
Yeah.
And she didn't need her, like, thankfully, her husband has a really, he's very successful. And they don't have to worry. And so she retired because she was like, she took early retirement or she just left before retirement age because she was like, I can't anymore. Like, I
Yeah.
can't go in every day and not be able to teach the way that and all the paperwork and all the like curriculum and sort of like the lesson plan stuff got to be such a nightmare that she was like, I'm done.
Well, see, here's the neat thing. Our balloon can go all over the world, which is definitely done today. However, I want to say the thread or the tie that binds here is the whole notion of human beings being authentically, genuinely themselves. And we can name, institution after institution after institution where the genuineness and the authenticity are actually frowned on, and they're bred out of the culture. And they have to be in order for people to blindly show up and do what they're told to do every single day in the face of having the opportunity to make it better, or in the face of having great ideas, and having kind of a place where they can try things out and they can fail until they succeed greatly. And I think with that in mind, it's a whole new world that we're getting into here now. We always want to act like a new year means a great start all over again. Everything's clean. We're going from ground zero. It's going to be cool from here. Well, yeah, maybe. But what if, if we finally just look to the thing, the old saying that I think Albert Einstein said that I used to love was, we can't solve these problems by looking, to the methods that we use to create them. And that's why I like the thought leaders who are out there today going against the grain. I mean, going against the current, basically saying, time out, what you're saying makes no sense to me. And I'm not going to accept that it's the only answer. We've got to stop and try different things now.
What you're saying reminds me of something that was having a conversation, then something I listened to when they were talking about, for example, some sort of one of the systems in the country, whether it was the legal, I think it was the prison system or something. And they were saying at one point or another, you have to kind of look at it and you have to say, what we did didn't work. And you don't try to revamp what's there. You
Right.
try to take what worked, move on and create something new. And that's that is a vital thing of growth, to sit there and say, okay, well, this did not work, and being able to say that it's okay that it didn't work. Like, we
Right.
did the best we could. This is the information we had to work with, but the system is failing and we've got to create something new. So it's not taking what the old was and trying to like mold it into something that's now going to fit, because hate to say it, it's that ain't going to work either.
No, it's a bunch of people that are fooling themselves, beginning to believe their own BS. All
Absolutely.
we have to do is just change this a little bit and let's do more money than we had last year. Oh, don't worry about it. We'll get it somehow.
Right. You- That's right.
I've
It's all
never
gonna
been able to run my household budget, that way. If I were, to compare myself to our federal government, I should be in debt at least 50 or $60 million right now.
well, and I look at, like, I don't think that I could navigate my health if I looked at it that way. Like, I'm very, very methodical and very organized about the way I kind of look at my health and well-being.
Yeah.
And it's not haphazard, and there is a plan. But I think we all need that plan. Like, we all need that plan. And we also have to, it brings to mind that word of responsibility. We'll have to take responsibility for our own lives, our
Another
own,
one.
our
Yeah.
own. Yeah.
One of my favorite military sayings is no plan can survive being put into action. The minute you start doing whatever it was you thought, the real world, gets tested, and now you've got to find out how you need to change. But the theme of authenticity and genuineness and continuously looking for ways in this world that we can fight for the opportunities for ourselves and other people to be who they are.
Absolutely. Yeah. There, there's such a beauty in letting people be who they are.
Yeah.
There really is. You look around the world and you're like, okay, the differences become celebrated. Why would we want to all be the same? Like, that doesn't.
There are, that's another whole show, by the way. Uh, but let's leave it here with that being a question that people can just ponder for a little bit. Why indeed would we not in support people growing into whoever they can become and be great?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Final thought?
Final thought, no, just we began with those little sort of poems or anything you can do to uplift somebody. So just start there. Like, make help someone start their day or end their day with a smile,
Right.
and just see if it can impact your world or if it impacts their world. Not getting attached to whether it does or not, but just that energy of, you know, I'm going to
Yeah.
let that person know I was thinking about them.
Playfully.
Playfully, exactly.
With,
Exactly. I didn't say
with,
that well, but
with joy.
exactly, I would say.
So it is 2025, but do you think maybe we should make our request that now goes back a little bit of time?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I like this. We share the soapbox at the end of the show and empower each other in the process of doing so. So I just want to remind you and ask you to reach out to somebody in your life by whatever means necessary, telephone call, go see them, send them a text, but just let them know that they're important to you and that your world works because they're there. And if they ever have a dark moment where they feel alone, they're not. Let them know they can reach out to you, and at a moment's notice, whatever they need, you'll be their partner in helping them get what they need.
Absolutely.
So with that said, shall we say our goodbyes to our lovely listeners and to each
Yes.
other?
Yes. Until the next time, what you always say, Bill, we are lighting the candle, a world that works.
Yes, ma'am, we are. Still and again. Bye for now, y'all.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.